I have written a letter to the President, a letter that I will share with you now that I sent to the President some time ago on February the 29th, a letter to the President of the United States. The reference in the letter is justice and mercy for Palestinians. Justice and mercy for Palestinians. This letter is a letter that I put my thoughts into. I say this because I write my speeches, I write my letters of this magnitude, and I don't want people blaming my staff for the things that I do. My staff, they're great people and they assist, but these are my ideas and my thoughts. This is the letter. Justice and mercy for Palestinians. Dear President Biden, I pen this communique driven by the dictates of conscience and with a heavy heart, saddened by the deaths in Palestine and Israel, compounded by Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent indications that Israel will continue to oppose the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state and continue maintaining control over stateless Palestinians in lands intended for a Palestinian state. He further indicated that the recognition of a Palestinian state will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties. So Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister, I rarely say Netanyahu. I respect the position that he holds. He's the Prime Minister, a person with great authority. And his position seems to be that there has to be a negotiated recognition of a Palestinian state, that Israel and Palestinians will have to negotiate. And once they come to a conclusion that there should be a Palestinian state, then we can recognize it. Then he goes on to say that the parties have to negotiate this and it cannot be done unilaterally. Well, here's what I say to the President. Mr. President, on May 14th of 1948, President Harry Truman became the first world leader to recognize Israel as a state within Palestine. Some things bear repeating, phraseology that I use quite regularly, because many things bear repeating. Mr. President, on May 14, 1948, President Harry Truman became the first world leader to recognize Israel as a state within Palestine, effectuating an imbalance of political influence for Israel. Again, some things bear repeating. Effectuating an imbalance of political influence for Israel. This was done unilaterally. That's what's in my letter. This was done unilaterally without the consent of defiantly disapproving Palestinians. The Palestinians did not approve of Israel becoming a state. It was done over their disapproval, many of whom were forcefully relocated. I go on to say, Mr. President, just as the Palestinians of 1948 were not allowed to thwart Israeli statehood, in the name of justice, we should not allow Israel to thwart Palestinian statehood. Sometimes silence can help us to collect our thoughts. Just as Palestinians of 1948 were not allowed to thwart Israeli statehood, in the name of justice, Mr. President, We should not allow Israel to thwart Palestinian statehood. Now we get to some very substantive commentary. This is particularly salient given that Prime Minister Netanyahu obliquely opposed a two-state solution long before October 7, 2023, long before the killing of innocent Israeli men, women, and especially children. Not in the letter, but as an aside, which was a horrific event, a day that will live in infamy, along with other days that live in infamy. I go on to say, for years, Prime Minister Netanyahu has condoned Hamas's control of Gaza to maintain a foil for a lack of a negotiating partner. By the way, this is not news. It's been reported on major networks that this occurred. For many years, Prime Minister Netanyahu has condoned Hamas's control of Gaza to maintain a foil for a lack of a negotiating partner who recognized Israel's right to exist. Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, a person that I respect in the sense that he is the leader of a nation. Prime Minister Netanyahu benefited from having Hamas in control of Gaza because he didn't have to negotiate a two-state solution. It was a means by which he could say the words two-state solution, but he didn't mean it. He didn't. The evidence is there for those who would see, but now there is a notion that there are some who are so blind, not because they cannot see, but because they choose not to see. So if you choose not to see, no one can make you see. You can remain in your state of darkness, but this is the truth. It's been widely reported. With Hamas, I go on to say, as a foil, Prime Minister Netanyahu feigned support for a two-state solution while enabling Israeli settlers to lay claim to land intended for a Palestinian state. My God. Feigning, pretending to want to support a two-state solution, while all along the way enabling settlers to lay claim to land intended for a Palestinian state. Mr. President, what President Truman did for Israel unilaterally in 1948, I emphasize unilaterally because remember, Prime Minister Netanyahu says, can't be unilateral. Israel has to agree for the Palestinians to have a state. Israel has a state, has had a state since 1948. Palestinians are stateless. Mr. President, what President Truman, that Mr. President is President Biden, if I may just substitute, President Biden, what President Truman did for Israel unilaterally in 1948, we can do unilaterally for Palestinians. Now, I am an avant-garde personality. I'm usually out ahead of the rest of the pack. This is going to come to fruition. It's just a matter of time. And when it does, the memory of this message will be clouded because there will be people chosen to bring the message when it is thought to be safe to bring the message. they will wait to see how safe is it for us to say these words and to come forth publicly and proclaim that there can be unilateral recognition. They have to wait. So I am the canary in the coal mine, and they'll be waiting to see how I am reacted to, and that's being kind. I continue by saying we should not allow a party feigning, pretending, that's parenthetically said, we should not allow a party feigning to negotiate in good faith to prevent our good faith unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. If we are acting in good faith, if we know that the Palestinians deserve a state, yes, there will be an interregnum. And while we're in that interregnum, there ought to be negotiations between people of goodwill who believe that there ought to be a Palestinian state. That the genesis of it is to a certain extent now, but that when the interregnum occurs, in full-blown interregnum, then we ought to make sure that we are on the right side, not just of history. It's a wonderful thing to be on the right side of history, but it's a better thing to be on the right side of righteousness, on the right side of saying you don't kill babies in the tens of thousands and think you're doing the right thing. The right side of righteousness. You don't just decimate the homes and schools and churches, synagogues, and properties of people, mosques, if you will. Don't just decimate those things and say, we did it because it was a just thing to do. And injustice in the name of justice is still an injustice. So be on the right side of righteousness. Act in good faith. And let's develop a Palestinian state. And we don't have to do it with the consent of Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. We don't have to do it with his consent. President Truman didn't have anybody's consent. He was the President of the United States of America. Mr. President, I don't have to remind you who you are. You know. But as the President of the United States of America, you don't need anybody's permission to recognize a Palestinian state. And you sure should not rely on the permission of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has been feigning, pretending to want a two-state solution while enabling Hamas. There's a lot more to be said about that, and I'll get to that in another message. I indicate in my letter to the President, lastly, in the name of mercy, I believe we must send tens of billions, not millions, of dollars in humanitarian aid to Palestine, to Gaza, to the West Bank. I believe we have to send tens of billions. And I believe we have to be proud to say we're sending the money in humanitarian aid to people who need tens of billions in humanitarian aid. Now pay particular attention to the words I'm about to say. To people who need tens of billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, because our fingerprints are all over what you've seen in these pictures. Our fingerprints are all over this. Our money has made this possible. We have a debt to righteousness. We ought to pay our debt to righteousness. Send tens of billions and be proud. Don't have to hide it in some bill. Don't have to announce that, well, we're going to send money to Ukraine, which I've supported. We're going to send money to Taiwan and the people in that area, Pacific Islanders, I've supported. But never say we're going to send money to the Palestinians. We're going to send money to Israel, which I have supported. As a matter of fact, the number exceeds $50 billion that I've supported to Israel. So if we're going to say we're going to send money to Ukraine and to Taiwan and to Israel, why can't we say we want to send money to the people who are suffering this injustice perpetrated by the Prime Minister of Israel with dollars, tax dollars from American citizens and other persons in this country who pay taxes, sales taxes, gasoline taxes. These tax dollars, I know it makes you uncomfortable, and you ought to be uncomfortable. These tax dollars have created this circumstance. Someone would say, well, no, those tax dollars weren't used for that. They were used for other purposes. But as my colleagues across the aisle like to remind me, there's something called fungibility. These dollars, fungible. They make it possible, if you have these dollars for one thing, then you can use your own dollars for other things. Hamas was wrong. Shouldn't have done what they did. Ought to be punished for what they did. Are being punished for what they did. But it's wrong for Mr. Netanyahu to kill tens of thousands, babies, innocent men, women, and children, an injustice of horrific proportions.